in starting to draft, what we want to do is, basically do what we did before in setting up our units to be in feet and inches, and now we're ready to rock and roll. So the toolbar, the draw toolbar, contains the following commands, and in the handout they're actually noted. The aliases of those commands are noted in the handout in caps. But there's the line, okay, there's a polyline, the circle, the arc, there's a rectangle tool, there is, if I expand this, a polygon tool. So keep in mind that, not only does expanding, the tool with more options, okay, and call up more options, but it also calls up additional tools that might be hiding underneath. So this has the rectangle and the polygon, there's an ellipse, okay, and this actually tells you different ways of creating the ellipse. And there's hatching, which we'll get into later on. And then down below, there's construction lines, there's splines, and we'll be working with those further on, okay? But we're going to be just starting with some basic lines to begin with. So we're going to be starting with the line command. And to activate the line command, we're either going to click on the tool button, okay? We can type in LINE, or we can type in L for line. Okay, again, as you can see, the L is followed by line in parentheses, so that's what tells you what the alias is. It's not a bad idea to kind of keep a list of these to begin with if you like to, or if you prefer to work with the aliases. As you get to work with it more, okay, these are going to become like second nature. So, a list, I used to have a list when I first started out of these aliases to begin with and the commands that I'm using to begin with, just to keep a record. Otherwise, some of them are listed in the handout, and that's why, this completion that they've added, to AutoCAD is really helpful, because if you have to draw a line, obviously you think that typing in line is the most logical, but it also calls up, other types of commands. So, for example, if line was not the command for line, at least you can go through a series of options to try to figure out what command you want to start to use. But anyways, we want to start by typing in L for line, or type in line, or go to the tool button, and then you'll see that AutoCAD is now saying specify first point. Okay, so what this does is this basically is telling you that the command line in AutoCAD is waiting for an entry from you. Okay, so the way that it's starting to talk to you is by entering the command. It's saying, you're saying, okay, I want to create a line. Okay, so AutoCAD recognizes that and says, okay, you want to create a line, but I need to know from what point to what point is going to be the line. So that's why it's asking you now to specify that first point. Okay. So we do this by left-clicking at any location within the model space, and then once we do that, okay, you'll notice that essentially we're rubber banding, the line that appears anchored to the location where you clicked. Okay. Now, again, if we look underneath here, or even to the dynamic input that's next to our cursor, AutoCAD's asking us, okay, you specified the first point, now what's the next point? Okay. And we can specify the next point in the manner that we did the first point by clicking and clicking and clicking and clicking. And essentially it's going to keep creating lines, and you'll see this, you'll still have the rubber banding of the cursor until we hit escape to get out of the command. Okay, so I'm going to hit escape, and you'll see that now it's asking me to type a command, so I'm technically out of that command. So this is the very, very typical process in the command structure in AutoCAD, okay? And as I said, it's also the language that AutoCAD will speak with all the commands. So once you've gotten used to this, mastering the new commands will come, much more quickly and easily. So in short, first select your command, then select the locations, and then select or hit escape to exit out of that command. And again, hitting escape aborts any command you might be in at any given time. So if you're not sure of what you're doing, you're not sure of the process that you're following, if you hit escape, it'll exit out of the command and essentially kind of reset everything for you. Now we'll repeat this okay, practicing the tools with polyline, rectangle, and circle, kind of placing random shapes within the model space. Polylines consist of individual segments, okay, that can be lines and arcs, and then they act as a single object. Now, when we get into some of the modifiers, we'll specifically note the difference between the line and the polyline. So if I hold down my middle scroll button, I'm going to scroll to a different part of the model space, and I'm going to click on the polyline command, and I'm going to do the same thing. And you'll see that it acts in the same way. The command will remain activated until I hit escape and get out of it. Just to note that any of these shapes that we create in AutoCAD are referred to as objects. So whenever we're drawing anything, okay, whether it's a circle, whether it's a square, whether it's rectangle or lines, okay, it's always going to be an object in AutoCAD. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my zoom button. Okay, you'll see if I scroll in or scroll up, it zooms in. If I scroll down, it zooms out. And then if I click on my middle button and move my mouse, it's going to pan my view to a different location. Okay, again, not physically moving any of this stuff, any of these objects. It's just moving my view. So I can do the same thing with circle. Okay, draw a circle as we did before, and rectangle. Again, it's going to ask me to specify first point and then corner point, and that's it. So again, this is the common language that AutoCAD uses when it starts to work with these tools and to get you working with these tools. Now, drawing limits. Okay, so when I start to draft, okay, and I start to move and I start to pan, you'll see that if I get to a certain extent, okay, you'll see that what happens to my pan hand is that now there's this edge to it and these arrows. And that's essentially the drawing limits that AutoCAD places on your drawing file, okay, your model space. It's basically saying, well, just to save memory or whatever, I'm just going to keep it confined to a certain area, and if you ever need to break the area, okay, there's ways of doing it. So for example, if I have objects that are way out in space and I can't see them, okay, and I'm trying to scroll to them and I'm trying to zoom out and I'm trying to do that, I can't do that, okay, because essentially it's placed these drawing limits on my drawing. Okay, and there's a limits command, okay, limits, limits, that allows you to reset the model space limits, okay, and basically you type in the limits that you have on the drawing. Okay, you can also turn them on and off. Sometimes I find that this gets a little bit tricky, okay, and it's a few steps that I always find, and this is what I call my Mac hack, okay. I know, stupid little name, but it's a way of there are different ways of hacking it, different ways that people use these tools and get around these issues that they might have in AutoCAD. And this is just maybe I'll set up these Mac hacks to kind of show you a little bit of what I do, okay, to get around these things. That might not be a little bit, that might not be by the book, okay, but it gets, does the same thing. What I do is that I just find that I just don't deal with these limits, okay, for whatever reason. Maybe I never, liked how it worked. Maybe I just never got used to using it. But what I did is I actually got used to using what I said is, my own Mac hack, okay, my way of setting these limits. And the way that I do this, and it really is, the only time these limits affect my use of AutoCAD is when I'm in the process of drafting and, what I can view. So it's doing the same thing here. And it really happens at the beginning, okay? Once you kind of break the limits, you really shouldn't, run into this issue again. So from my experience, what I've learned to do is not really use these limits, okay? But again, this is a bit of a hack that I do. And it's very unorthodox, but, it tends to work for me and tends to be faster for me for some reason. I don't know, maybe it's extra steps, but it just works for me. And so what I usually do is I draw a line, okay, to essentially break the limits. Because what happens is that even though you might set new limits, okay, to a drawing, it might come back and you might still need to break the limits after that. So essentially what I do is I just draw a line really quickly and I type in a measurement. Okay, so when we start to work with lines, we can either arbitrarily, okay, as we've done before, give it distances and measurements. But what we can also do is, you'll see that with the input, okay, in the blue box, we can actually type in a measurement in order to make it more accurate. Okay, this doesn't have to be accurate, but I'm going to type in a distance that I typically use in order to break the limits of my drawing. Okay, again, unorthodox, but this is a process that I go through. So what I do is I create a line, I rubber band it kind of off into the distance, and then I type in, let's say 10,000 feet. Okay, so 10,000 and then the foot sign, and then I hit enter to escape, or to set the next point, and then I hit escape to get out of the command, or hit enter to get out of the command. Enter or escape, essentially works in the same way. And then what I do is I do a zoom extents. Okay, and the way that I can do it is I can either double click on the scroll button, okay, as we learned in the last tutorial, or what I can do is I can use the zoom command. And the zoom command also has several options and sub options that are associated with it. So if I type in Z for zoom, okay, or I can type in zoom and hit enter. Okay, what it's asking me is, again, it knows that I want to zoom, but it doesn't know what I want to zoom to. Okay, so you'll see that down at the bottom, there's zoom, there's all center, dynamic, extents, previous, scale, window, object, so on and so forth. And you can start to play around with this because you start to use zoom a lot, okay, right off the bat in AutoCAD. So again, what's this doing is it's essentially talking back to you and asking for further input. And you'll note, that most commands have these subcommands and these additional commands, okay, that AutoCAD is associated with the tool. So we see those at the bottom, okay, and there are additional options that we have with the zoom command. Now the default for the zoom command is to create a window, okay, because basically what it's asking me is to specify the corner of the window, or it has these sub options. Okay, to create a window, I can just click on one corner and another, and it'll zoom to that window. Okay, but what I want to do is I want to do zoom to extents, and what extents is it's the extents of all of the objects in your model space. So what's helpful about that is that a lot of times when you start to draft, things kind of start to float off in space. Okay, I might have objects that are way far away, and I don't realize that. Okay, and it's good practice when you start to draft to keep a nice clean drawing. So usually what I do is I do a zoom extents every so often to make sure that I don't have anything that's floating off into space, and that's by doing a zoom extents. So I'm going to type in Z for zoom, and then what I want to do is I want to call up the extents sub option. And the way that I know what extents is, okay, is, as I said before, when we enter commands, it doesn't matter the case that we entered in. I can type, start typing in lowercase, I can start typing with my caps lock on. AutoCAD will just automatically recognize the entering of text in general. Now what you see at the bottom is that zoom, you'll see that the first letter, okay, is capital, and it's in blue, okay, just as another little added effect to it. Now, the capital isn't for it to be proper center, sentence case. Okay, as you can see here, with these little subcommands, okay, you'll see that the first letter isn't capital as it would be in sentence case. Okay, but it has the next two, next two letters after it be capitals, and what that indicates is that that's what you have to hit. Okay, that's the key that you have to enter in order to activate that part of the command. So for example, I want to do a zoom extents. I already typed in Z for zoom, and now I want to type in E for extents. And I know that I need to type in E because that E is capital. Okay, a lot of times you'll find it at the beginning, sometimes you won't. Might be some times where the capital is, in the middle of, that subcommand, and that's fine, but that's AutoCAD saying you have to hit that in order to get the extents. So if I type in E, and it doesn't matter if it's, again, it doesn't matter if it's capital or not, this is just an indicator that that's what you have to hit, and hit enter. Okay, what it does is it zooms to the extents. So it zooms to the extents of my 10,000 foot line, and that will essentially break the limits, those drawing limits that AutoCAD has imposed upon my drawing. Now, yeah, I know to begin with this is, a much longer process. You're like, well, why not just put in the limits, and have that be faster? When you start to get used to this more and more and more, this, I don't know, I find is just the fastest way of doing it. So then what I do is I select this line by clicking on it, and then I hit E. Okay, E is for erase, as you can see below, and hit enter. And now what I want to do is I want to zoom extents again, because once I've gotten rid of that line, when I zoom to the extents, it'll zoom to the extents of those objects that I created in that space. Okay, so I'm going to type in Z again, and I can type in E again, or if you're using this dynamic input, you'll notice that at the edge of it, there's a little down arrow key, okay, or a graphic that looks like a little down arrow. If I hit my down arrow key, that's going to get me all of the options, okay, all of these sub options that are the same ones down here. And so this is exactly why a lot of people will prefer to work with the dynamic input as opposed, to this command window, and they'll actually close out the command window because you have all of the sub options here too as well. And I can just move my cursor down and click on the extents, and now you'll see that it brings me back to all of those objects. I no longer have that line anymore because I erased it, and now this is the extents of my objects within all of my model space.